The human brain has to be really huge, has to be really large to be able to perform this complex function called consciousness. But it's so large, it has to be so large, in fact, that it kills, 1 out of 5 women who give birth without modern medicine to help them. So that's really, messy design, a bad design. I mean, you wouldn't want to make something that, babies kill their mothers, 1 out of every 5 times. And there are many other problems.
God might have mother issues.
Yeah,
you
might have mother issues, yeah. And there are other problems. The brain is, a huge hog. I mean, it sucks up all the oxygen and all the energy, tons amount of oxygen and energy. So you're wasting a lot of your breathing and eating and so forth just to feed this brain. So it's very inefficient. And it's very vulnerable to injury. I mean, it's a very delicate organ. If it gets injured, your whole cognitive functions can be hugely damaged. You can lose your sight, you can lose your reason, and you can lose control of your emotions. I mean, it's a very vulnerable organ. It's not what a God would design, and God wouldn't need to design this, because if a God exists, then obviously a mind can exist without a body, because God is without a body. So we could have minds without brains. We don't need brains. God could just give us a soul, like the Christians actually think we have, and if we had a soul, and it did all the actual consciousness and perceiving and thinking, we wouldn't need a brain. So we wouldn't have to kill our mothers. We wouldn't have to have this organ that's sucking up all our energy and making our bodies very inefficient. We wouldn't have this delicate organ that could easily be injured and ruin our cognitive faculties and so forth. There would be no need for that brain. But if God does not exist, in fact, if it's impossible for a mind to exist without a fleshy organ to create it, then it necessarily follows that the only way to have a conscious being is to have this large, messy, vulnerable brain. So isn't it surprising that on the assumption that there's no such thing as a disembodied mind, it necessarily predicts that the only way there could be a mind is to have this complex brain. Lo and behold, we have this huge complex brain. And yet on the Christian theory, we expect the exact opposite. We expect to have souls, not brains. So why do we even need brains? We need brains if atheism is true. So the existence of large brains is positive proof that atheism is true. But, and because, Christian God would build something differently. Now the Christian will respond to try to make up excuses for why God made the brain, but these excuses are just pulled out of thin air, and they don't really rescue the theory. It's still the fact that the only way atheism can be true is if we have these large brains. If we have these large brains, that's evidence for atheism. It might not be proof, it might not settle the issue, but it's evidence for it. And if God had some weird reason to do this, then it means that God had some weird reason to make the universe look exactly like it would have to look if God did not exist. And that seems highly improbable.
So atheism is a lack of belief?
Yes, that's my position. There are some atheists, well, usually it's agnostics, who insist on calling themselves agnostics, who insist that atheism is denial of the existence of God. And
no, atheism is, an atheist is just an agnostic who's thought about it.
Yeah. I would say so, and I will say, I'm an atheist partly because I'm an agnostic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a lack of belief. There's nothing there, so why do anything, though? I don't understand. Why not? And people ask all the time. Why? Yeah. I mean, sure, I'm an atheist too, but why do you make a point of? Why do you make a crusade of it?
Well, to me, philosophy is very important. I mean, it is my religion, and I take it as seriously as a Christian takes his religion. And philosophy, to me, is the objective of trying to understand yourself, understand the universe, understand your place in the universe. And it's to understand what exists, how does it work, what do we do about it now. And that to me is very important. It's something everyone should pursue. I think people should abandon religion and pursue philosophy, and pursue it the way Socrates and Aristotle pursued it, with questioning, with trying to find out what the truth is, constantly questioning, constantly checking the facts, constantly trying to integrate everything into a coherent worldview. And that's what my book, Sense and Goodness, is about, is I take everything I know and I show that all this research I've done over all these years has led me to believe that naturalism is the correct worldview, and I lay out what that is and why I believe it's the correct worldview. And it leads to a lot of conclusions about what kind of political views you should have, what kind of moral values you should have, how we should investigate things, the value of science, for example. Even everyday life. I mean, how do we decide what stories we're going to believe? We're reading a journalist, listening to a politician. Everything about the way you go through life, how you decide what to believe, how you investigate claims, how you conduct your life, all comes from your philosophy of life, whether you know it or not. And that's my book is presenting the atheist, or an atheist philosophy of life. It's a view of the world that is a positive assertion about what exists and what the nature of it is, called naturalism. And it just happens to be an atheistic philosophy because there's no God in it. There are other atheistic philosophies, of course. I mean, people will tell you about Marxism and objectivism and so forth. I don't buy any of those. I go into naturalism, the secular, or the ethical part of which is secular humanism. And that's what my book defends. And I think it's very important for people to explore these things. And I always wanted to write this book. I mean, even from my high school days, even though I had a completely different philosophy of life then, I wanted to write a book that conveyed a philosophy of life that people could come up and go and read and decide whether, is that right or wrong, or maybe I'll change some things. That's the kind of thing I've always wanted to do, and that's what I'm doing now. Of course, through all my investigations, I've ended up in a different place than I thought I would. But yeah, that's why I do that. And of course, that butts me up against the Christians who say I'm wrong.